You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. Throughout this week, I've learned Java on a deeper level through writing a book and am still ironing out details for upcoming meetup tours. But a virtual session is scheduled and ready to go for next week. Then I found a nice article with another perspective on the fine line between using AI for superpowers and letting the overlords take over without a single thought. I'll explain more in this episode. Let's start with the things that I am learning through writing this AI Java book. The chapter that I'm working on right now is on lambdas and streams. And while I've written several lambdas and streams in my Java applications over the years, I've never really dug into the internals or the proper terminology to attach to the different things that I was doing with those. When people would mention lambdas or streams, I would follow along with the conversation, but not fully grasp all of the details and really what the things were doing and what all they were talking about, how it functioned. This seems a little bit silly, but I never really slowed down on those simple basic foundations and relearned some of what I was using on a regular basis. I learned about the Java programming language through courses during my academic study. However, even if lambdas and streams were available in the language at the time, it wasn't something that was really well covered or talked about from a problem-solving perspective or a thorough understanding of this is when and how and why you would use these. So let me perhaps fill in some of the gaps in case you don't know some of the things that I have surfaced in learning throughout the writing of this week. Lambdas are rules for a processing pipeline. You often will construct these rules for sorting, filtering, and other types of functions that will get condensed into a small bit of code. Typically, lambdas are in one line. You've likely seen these before, things with the arrow notation that will extract a field from an object variable, or format a string for the output, or select certain items with a specific value. All of those can be written as lambdas. Now, once we have the rule in place, our lambda, then we might want to process collections, multiple items of things in a list or a set or a group, through a series of steps that will filter, transform, and or collect those items into some specific shape. That is where the Java streams come in. The stream lets you assemble the pipeline with those steps to process the items in that collection. And then the lambdas will tell you what to do with each item. Those are your business rules. Both lambdas and streams are an excellent example of declarative capabilities. Instead of expressing all of the code to do the same functionality in an imperative syntax with for loops and repetitive conditions to get the results that you want, you can use Java lambdas and streams to concisely declare the output that you want, and then the Java language will handle the operation work. So again, these are tidbits that I have picked up all throughout this week as I'm working through the chapter on lambdas and streams in the Java book. It's a lot of exploration and deep dives into these topics and these areas, how, when, and why you use these different things, the different ways to construct them, why you would pick one aspect over another, what you're trying to do, and the syntax that goes along to accomplish that problem. I have found this really interesting and many examples of this throughout my writing that I hope to bring about and share throughout the future episodes of this as well. And then, of course, once the book is released, I can talk more in detail about the things that I learned and covered and concepts and topics that are dedicated in the book. I do have other snapshots of things that I've been working on this week. So I have made good progress on the Java book, not just in the learning aspect, but actually progress on the writing. Just as I predicted last week, I mentioned in last week's episode that progress was a little bit slower because I was trying to frame and describe the opening of the new chapter, but I did figure I would catch up this week once I got past that blank slate starting point. That's always the toughest part, right? Is to start something, to set the framing and set the stage for the chapter or for the paper or whatever writing content piece you're working on. And the same thing is happening this week since I started the opening last week and got that done. Now I've beaten all of my writing goals every day this week because I'm in the flow throughout the middle of this chapter. I'm writing lots of pages, lots of code examples back and forth, and everything is just right in the groove and churning out really well right now. I also have a virtual meetup that is happening next week for the Miami Java user group. I will again link that. I believe I linked it in last week's episode as well, but I'll link it as well in the show notes for this week's. Come join us. I will share the details. It's a virtual session, entirely free. So if you want to sign up and join us, it'll be in the evening time for East Coast US. We would love to have you join us for that. I did have some time to read an article this week, and the one that I read is a little bit on the longer side than some of the ones that I read, but it talks more about the fine line between AI and human development, specifically between cognitive offloading and cognitive surrender. Now, one is a good thing and viewed as very positive. The other one is less so, but again, we just have to be careful where our perspective and our dedication sits in this spectrum of cognitive offloading versus cognitive surrender. The author's perspective is not negative and even includes a closing paragraph about how much improvement that his work has seen in using these AI tools. But the author cautions against accepting answers by rote and not thinking through them ourselves. As with anything, all of us want to hit the easy button. We want to copy a smart classmate's test answers. We would rather vote or regurgitate political stances of family or friends or those around us. We copy paste code, which also happened before AI, by the way, with Stack Overflow, and accept it if the code works. We don't think anything more of it. Back in the old days before AI, we would copy paste the code from Stack Overflow. We'd drop it into our program, we would run it. Hey, great, it works. Let's move on. We wouldn't take the time to break that apart and tease it apart and really understand what the code was trying to do in a lot of cases. However, that lack of understanding is what's problematic. And now that's even more so than probably before. It's easier to let the coding tools make changes and then sanity check them without fully comprehending or understanding what's going on. Or you can skip the steps and just get it done. You're too busy, you've got too many things on your plate. Well, I'll just skip the step of thorough review. I'll just check the box and keep moving on. I'd rather get this accomplished and hit my deadline than really understand and know what's going on in the code. The article talks about the difference between cognitive offloading and cognitive surrender. I think of it like delegating, which is actually a term that's used later in the article, versus completely giving up, letting someone else completely take over. So that's the difference between the offloading versus the surrender. There are a few areas that cognitive surrender shows up in development right now. First is learning something new. And here's a quote from the article that I really liked. Engineers who used AI to generate code while learning a new library scored 17% lower on a follow-up comprehension quiz than in the control group. Engineers who used AI for conceptual inquiry, things like asking questions, exploring trade-offs, held their ground. This is one that I can vouch for because this is kind of the same thing as copy pasting from Stack Overflow pre-AI. It's easy to find something that works and then not fully understand what it does or why it works. And you wouldn't be able to remember that code or copy it from your brain, knowing what you needed to do for next time if you ran across that same problem again. Hello, lambdas and streams that I talked about earlier. I can't fully well utilize those until I really understand what the language is trying to do for lambdas and streams and the use cases where I need and want them. The author also discusses the concept of a calibration question. The question to keep asking yourself, am I forming an independent view of this answer or just adopting the agent's view wholesale? Those are different psychological acts that look identical from the outside. This is a quote from the article. It's the same thing that you want to ask in a lot of different concepts and topics that you come across in life. Am I forming an independent view of this answer, or am I just adopting whatever is popular or common or what I hear around me? Another question that I often ask myself personally is, could I explain this to someone else? Could I present on it well enough for someone to follow? In other words, stand up and give a presentation on this. If these questions both answer yes for me, then that's a great place to be. I know when to use them. I know how I could explain them or teach this to somebody else. This is one of those things that I can now say that I've achieved with lambdas and streams as I'm writing the book. Another criteria the author puts under this is notice when you're tired. I found this incredibly helpful and one that I think often gets overlooked. The author says that you really need to pay attention when you're tired and when you kind of turn off the brain power, because fatigue will do that. I've always heard fatigue is the number one enemy of really anything, whether that's parenting, development, etc. Wherever you need to make decisions, fatigue is the one thing that will want to turn off that brain power. I think this is really important to consider. If you're looking at the end of the day, it might be less likely for you to cognitively review what the AI coding tool is doing, and you might be more willing to just accept, and check those boxes. I've mentioned this on other topics that there is a fine line between the way we define and the way that we operate, and this article makes that same statement. The author says, here's a quote, "The posture matters, and we don't talk about it nearly enough. Cognitive offloading is a superpower. Cognitive surrender is the failure mode of using it without noticing the line between them. The job increasingly is to stay calibrated about which side of that line you're standing on at any given moment. Throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, depending on the season, you might be more or less likely to give in to cognitive surrender. But we really need to monitor this and stay on top of this and make sure that we are looking for ways to cognitively offload, in other words, to delegate to our AI coding tools rather than just handing over the responsibility and the accountability and all of the work to the AI. That's where things can really get into negative spaces and potential downstream issues. This week surfaced a deeper understanding of concepts in Java through writing a chapter on streams and lambdas in the AI Java book. Then I have a virtual meetup happening next week, and we'd love to have you join us. Finally, the article I read this week discussed the difference between using AI tools for cognitive offloading, or delegation, versus cognitive surrender, where you sacrifice your own decision, encouraging us to think critically to improve our own work rather than checking boxes for completion. Thanks for listening, and happy coding.